Welcome, everybody. We are excited to be back tonight. Hope everybody's doing good as the school year, thankfully, is coming kind of to a wind down. I know I'm still buried in evaluations, but one day I will be able to catch a breath. But my name is Rachel. I'm a school psychologist in Maryland, and today we have two guests here. I know that normally we have three hosts and a guest, but today we have two guests. So I'm going to tell you how to participate tonight because Rebecca has not been allowed to do that tonight because she is officially a guest. So if you're watching live, you can certainly, I think the best way to get in touch with us is through the YouTube chat right there that we'll see pop right up. Be aware that we might flash some of your comments and whatnot up on the screen if we see that. So we'll be excited to do that. You can also get us on the Facebook page. Send us a private message or a comment right directly to us, and then you can also get us on Twitter with hashtag Psych Podcast. So we will be on the lookout for those things. I hope I didn't mess that up, Rebecca. Was that okay? Was that pretty good? Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Eric now, who's going to introduce our guests. Eric.
All right. Well, we are excited to have a recurring guest and one of our co-hosts as our guests this evening. And we want to talk with them in particular about their new book, but also about the wonderful work that they're doing. So I would like to introduce Dr. Caren Baruch-Feldman, who is a clinical psychologist and certified school psychologist. She's authored numerous articles and led workshops on helping children and adults cope with stress and worry, developing grit and self-control, and helping people make positive change. Dr. Baruch-Feldman is also the author of The Grit Guide for Teens and now the co-author of the Resilience Workbook for Children. And we also have Rebecca Comizio, and she is a nationally certified school psychologist working in Fairfield County, Connecticut. She was named Connecticut's 2019 School Psychologist of the Year. She is co-host of the School Psych podcast and also the proud mother of 4 children, adult children, and fur baby. She's the co-author of 70 play activities for better thinking, self-regulation, learning, and behavior, and also the co-author of the Resilience Workbook for Kids. So published by New Harbinger, I should say, just released in 2022. So welcome, Caren and Rebecca. We're excited to have you both here.
Thank you so much. It's so exciting and also a little strange for me to be here.
Well, tell us a little bit about perhaps just beginning with resilience. I know we tossed that word around in the field, but what is resilience and how did you get started on this project?
So in terms of resilience, I mean, there are a lot of people who have lots of different definitions. I think Rebecca and I really believe that resilience is the ability to cope with stress. It's the process of coping with stress. And I think that word process is important because I think when you cope with stress, you actually gain resilience, and then you're able to deal with things that are more difficult, hopefully in the future. So I think that that's the definition that we are sticking to for our work in the book and in our work in our schools.
Yeah, that was beautifully said. I don't have too much to add to that, except to say that Caren and I have been working on this project since kind of the start of the pandemic. And it's been just like a real pleasure to work with a friend and a colleague as resilient and gritty as Caren is. She, I just have always admired her work even before we became friends. And so it's been a really fun process. And I'd love to tell you all a little bit about that too, because I know as a school psychologist, sometimes just the regular day-to-day can become a lot. And currently it seems like in the state of our schools, it's a lot. And so this was a real passion project for me. And I recommend finding a friend and taking on a project.
And I think you need both resilience and grit to be able to write a book. So I think both those qualities are really, really important.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, how did you get started on this project in particular? Did the pandemic have any influence on your thoughts about resilience and children, or did you begin this prior to things hitting the fan, so to speak, in 2020?
It was really just at the start. Schools had closed, and distance learning was in full swing, and we were thinking and speaking about the concepts of resilience within our own school districts for our colleagues and for our students, and because we had that similar interest to really lean in to look at the science of how do people get through crises and what are the variables that can predict resilience. We had the same interest in our conversations about what we were doing at work. And so Caren and I had both published before, and she just asked me if I would like to work on this project with her, and I absolutely did. So I think we began first on a walk around my neighborhood where we brainstormed some ideas and some acronyms. And then at my kitchen table was our second meeting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, I don't know if you remember this, Rebecca, but I think, first of all, I mean, people should know that this process takes a really long time. So we started this in 2020. And when we found out that the book wasn't really going to be released till May of now, we were like, well, I'm sure COVID will be in the, no one's going to be talking about COVID. No one's going to be caring about resilience. Little did we know at that time, right? I don't know if you remember this, like how important it actually came out, I think, at a really important time. And I think it's the timing was really, it wound up being really great. But I think that for me personally, and we'll talk maybe a little bit about our resilience story, I had written a book on grit. And although I feel grit, it has a lot of value, especially if you have both parts of the definition, which is the passion and perseverance when you think about grit. I also felt, because I actually had gotten sick, and I wanted to be super, super gritty at that time, but no matter what, I just wasn't feeling well. And I really felt like I needed to lean into resilience. So for me, it became a little bit more personal about what makes somebody resilient. How can you be resilient when you're really facing these stressors?
Yeah, I think the topic is personal for me as well. I have had, I have shared this before, so I don't mind sharing here that growing up, I had a pretty difficult childhood. I had my parents had an arranged marriage, and they didn't know each other before they met, which often works out just beautifully. But in my parents' case, my father learned that my mother had severe mental illness, and it got worse after I was born, and then after my sister was born. But it was a really, difficult growing up. My mom was really not capable of taking care of us. And so for a while, as a small child, it took me a while to just kind of figure out what was happening, why I felt so different, why other parents would take their kids to the bake sale and after school activities and birthday parties, and my father worked for long hours and my mother wasn't able to be available for me. So I was really on my own for a lot of my early childhood. And then by middle school and high school, I was just really angry about it. And so that's the way I dealt with it. But coming out of that phase of rebellion and anger, I really started to think about how lucky I was, that I had a dad who cared about me so much and who forgave me every time I did something horrible, which was quite regularly. And how lucky I was that despite, all the ways I sabotaged my high school education, I was able to get a great education in college. And once I got to that stage, I stopped kind of taking that for granted. And I thought a lot about what was it that got me to that point? How did I get through all the hardships that my family struggled with? And so I remember in college reading a lot about resilience and adverse childhood experiences and trauma and forgiveness studies, and all of these areas of research were always really interesting to me, and really why I became a school psychologist, because I thought, there are so many kids in schools that may look just fine when they come to school every day, but they may not be, and they really need the adults in school. And so I wanted to be an adult for my students, like the adults along my way that really supported me. And I remember to this day.
That's awesome. And I'm so, it's just very powerful and positive that, you understand, I think, where kids are coming from a lot with some of this. And I think that that's important. I remember first reading in grad school about resilience, like being assigned some sort of a research paper on it. It was kind of very dry reading, but I remember the take-home message of that was overall, like, kids are overall pretty resilient as a whole. Mm-hmm. That most kids, if they go through something traumatic, they go through a difficult spot, like the majority of them will come out okay and will compensate and will, through, obviously there's resiliency factors and things that make things more likely than not. But I remember thinking about that article that, okay, that's a good thing. Most kids will be okay. But as school psychologists, we're not as concerned. I mean, we're concerned with most kids as a whole, but the kids that we often work with are not the most kids, the kids that go through some of this stuff and don't come out all right without, people like you, like school psychologists as a whole, stepping up and paying attention and seeking out these interactions and whatnot. So that is just powerful to me and inspirational that, I hope that school psychologists are, listening to that message, and that I think that, that shows value in that and importance and resilience. Sorry, I'm rambling.
I think that's so important.
Yeah, it's so important. And I think that you touched on two things. One is that you're absolutely right. There have been a lot of longitudinal studies that looked at resilience, and most of the resilience research started with looking at a population that had maybe experienced, real stress or trauma or things like that, and then seeing how they turned out. And a lot of them actually, as you said, are wound up being okay, which I think was surprising when people, just read about that. And so our hope with the book is that, yes, we feel like there are a lot of kids that are, kind of naturally resilient, but we also think life is difficult. I do think that life, if you live a full life, you will have to deal with stress. So for the kids who are doing okay now, I think our hope is that to read this and say, okay, things are okay now, but in the future, if you deal with stress or have some adversity, these are things that we find to be really helpful. And then for the other ones, like that of our mandated counseling or the other ones that us as school psychologists have to deal with, we're really hoping that those kids could also benefit from the research. And our hope is writing it in a way that we would take the research and put it in a way that's very child friendly, and so that kids can access it and use that and sort of grow.
Yeah, I think that's really important because, as Caren said, most kids are resilient. Most people are resilient. We have this natural capacity to manage really difficult things. I also think that we can reach kids in order to tell them, if they're going through hard things, that they are not alone, because that social support and adult support is so important. And to send the message that it's okay to not be okay, that they can talk about it. They can share their difficulties, how they feel, their emotions, and not have to feel like something's wrong with them or that, embarrassed of it. And I feel as though if we can get that kind of social emotional learning into schools as prevention, and also as just the tools and the language and the strategies that kids can use if something tricky comes up, or to support their friends, or just to kind of have that understanding that, no one's always happy. That, in fact, that would probably be weird because, and some stress is good. We have a section about stress and talking about the difference between good stress and workable stress, and then chronic or traumatic stress. So just, defining terms for kids so that they have the words to talk about their experiences, I think is so important. And I feel as though parts of the reason why I kind of kept it to myself and maybe took longer to find my inner resilience was that I didn't have the words for it. And I felt like I couldn't share with anybody because it was too embarrassing or shameful or weird. And so I really wish that I could take that stigma away for all kids.
And I also think, coming here on the show where we have school psychologists, I think, and I thought you were going to also say that this is something else that you learned, which is that the number one factor in building resilience is having this charismatic adult, having this adult in your life. It could be a parent, but it also could be a school psychologist. It could be an educator. It can be, somebody, a youth professional. And I think that I know for myself, this is I feel like this year has been really, really difficult as a school psychologist. And I know our educators are also really feeling a lot of stress, but I think it's really empowering and to remember why we do this, that we could be that person for a child. And it doesn't have to be grand. It can be these micro moments, like we say. But when we develop those relationships, we have the power to really change children's lives around. And that is the number one factor for resilience.
Awesome. I love that, prevention is so much more effective than, kind of not, giving kids these tools so that they can kind of use it when something arises, because exactly, life is not all totally smooth sailing. So tell us a little bit about how one might use the book. If I'm a school psychologist and I this book now comes to me through Amazon and I'm excited to crack, is this something that is used in a small group in counseling to supplement things? How am I using this book?
Do you want me to start? So, the way we structured the book, and again, I think that, most people, I'm sure you've gotten books and you pull things apart and you take what, sort of resonates with you. However, I do think the book can be sort of used, from front to back. We structure it with this notion of storms. Oh, thank you, Rebecca, for sharing that, which is that it starts with adults. So we have the book actually, recommends very highly at the beginning for the adult who is working with this book to go online, and it's free online on New Harbinger and very easy to access, I was told. There's an online section just for educators. There's an online section just for parents or caregivers to really understand how to develop resilience in themselves, because we really believe that first and foremost, if your cup is empty, you're not going to be able to give to anybody else. So a lot of the skills that we talk about in the book, we also teach to adults. And by the way, I have heard adults saying, by the way, that's nice for the kids, but your book, it was very simple and it helped me. It really, I could go through the book and use a lot of the skills. So of course it's targeted to kids. But again, a lot of the skills we talk about are really good for adults. And also teaching adults this notion about how important their role is in building resilience. And then the next step is that we have the next section of the book is we teach kids directly the skill of resilience. So just like you teach reading and writing and math, we believe that resilience can be taught like a skill and broken down into parts, and to have a better understanding of what is resilience, why it's important, and how they can start to develop it. Then the next step is, in terms of elaborating on the skills, is about emotions, helping kids to own all their emotions. And I don't know if Rebecca has also, I've gotten a lot of feedback about this section. I think sometimes some books don't always spend so much time about emotions, but we were very deliberate in that we really try to help kids both to accept the yuck and to pump up positive emotions. And we spend a whole chapter in that area about emotions. And then the next section is R, to rule your mind. So as somebody who's a cognitive behavioral psychologist, and I know Rebecca leans into a lot of ACT principles as well, we really teach kids about like catching those thoughts and challenging them. And then ultimately, I believe that it's not enough just to know the skill, you have to do the skill. So then how do you manage those behaviors? So how do you put this into practice? And then the last part is the last S, which is that it's about social support and structure and the environment. Some of the criticism for both resilience and grit too is that we often just are, asking kids who are already downtrodden to like pick themselves up by their bootstraps, or there's too much an emphasis on the individual. And Rebecca and I are very clear that yes, this book is to teach individual skills, but we would be remiss, and I think it's distortion, not to also focus also on the environment, on the structure, on all these things that we have around us, and we need to build those too. So that's like how the book is sort of set up. And then also the other way it's kind of set up, and I think it's kind of cute, is that we generally, we have at the end of each chapter, the kids get to do like a puzzle. And because first of all, we do it because it's fun, but also because I think puzzles in itself build resilience. The puzzles are not easy, by the way. So I think me and Rebecca were like struggling with these puzzles. So, and we say, this will take resilience. This will also, maybe you'll have to check in with your special adult to do the puzzle. However, again, in that process, in the doing, we actually feel like kids will build the skills.
What age group would this be directed towards?
So we spent a lot of time kind of arguing with the publisher a little bit on that. We wanted to make it as broad as possible, but it does require, a certain reading level. And so the publisher shares it for ages 7 to 12. And we know that, our youngest readers will likely need more adult support. And, as Caren said, in every chapter, there's an activity that we encourage our children, our readers, to connect with their special adult. But for our younger readers, even the concepts that I think are worth reading together with an adult or an older sibling or a mentor. But yeah, our sweet spot is probably in the 8 to 11 range, I'd say.
Right. And again, like the book can be used, but I also think you can pull out, like, I don't know, I push into a lot of classes as a school psychologist, and I actually have, and if people want, I'm also happy to share with people. I've made a Google Slides based on a lot of the principles from the book. I'm just pushing into the class and then basically teaching them about their mindset, about their emotions, about their behaviors, and doing a little activity with those things. So I think that if you wanted to, you can take your highlight or things that you wanted, and then you could push in, or you could use the book for groups or things like that as well.
Yeah. We're also really excited this summer to be creating a live on demand praxis webinar for educators and clinicians on using the book and on resilience, building resilience in young people in general.
What made you focus on kids in particular? I mean, I know you both work in schools, but there's a lot of great information about cognitive behavior therapies. And how did you sort of come to the direction of focusing on resilience for kids?
Well, one thing that we definitely noticed is there is a lot more out there for older kids and teenagers on resilience, and in terms of this kind of reading, like psychoeducation, nonfiction, workbooks. And we just felt that there was a real need. I know for me, I spend a lot of time kind of converting things that I find out there in the world for my elementary age students. And these are a lot of the lessons that I would do with kids regularly, just to help them build their emotion vocabulary and think about think flexibly and learn some cognitive flexibility strategies, and to choose goal-directed actions that support what they care about. And so book, I feel, is it's a really comes from positive psychology, from that wherever you are, here are some skills that will serve you well, that can move you +1 or +2. And I love the little ones. I love working with them and talking with them. So I felt like this book could really be needed by other school professionals and teachers and parents.
And also we got that second by some of the leaders in the field. So Robert Brooks, who wrote our foreword, and Ken Ginsberg, who is a pediatrician who really has written a lot on resilience in teens, both said to me and talking to both me and Rebecca, like, we are so happy that you wrote this book, because we know that it's so important, but nobody has really kind of put together those skills in one place. So we were really glad to fill that, niche.
Is this a book that could be, say, I have a lot of parents that ask for resources. Could this be given to a parent to work with their kid? As far as, I'm assuming it's pretty parent friendly, and you don't need the expertise necessarily of a school psychologist to kind of walk through everything, right? So this sounds like a really good resource to be recommending out.
Absolutely. I think one of the things I also really like to do in my regular work is try to script things for parents, because sometimes if parents will call me and say, I really want to talk to my child about their big feelings, or, but I'm not sure, what are the words you would use? How should I say this? How do I start the conversation? So I think by reading with your child, you'll start to absorb the language. Caren and I have a nice workflow together. And so you'll probably hear both of our voices coming through loud and clear in the book. But this is the way we talk to kids. And I think that what's helpful is the more an adult reads through it, the more that they can begin to add to the language, to be able to translate, to ask questions using that same kind of language. And I hope that will be really helpful to parents.
Just like on a practical matter, I know that people are always looking for practical ideas. Like, I think that one of the things that, like, for example, just in terms of scripting or language that we talk about, is we have about like 2-3 little words that we think are so helpful for resilience, which are the words and yet. A lot of times when parents or clinicians or teachers speak to kids, they'll say something and they'll say, a statement and then but, and then basically when you say but, you basically undermine everything that you said beforehand. So simply by using that dialectic of and, it can be really powerful. Like, I know you're struggling and I also need you to do your homework. Not but you need to do your homework. It has a very different feel. And then also using the 3-letter word of like yet, to like emphasizing this idea of growth mindset. And if a skill is not developed, the child is just not there yet. The parent is not there yet, or a school psychologist even could be just not there yet. So I think, those are the kind of like practical, script-like words that, for example, I just thought of quickly that we share with people, like that they are real takeaways that you can use and put into your daily life.
Sure. We hope school psychologists will download the reference section that we have online as well, because there's just so much interesting reading out there. And I think that will add to your toolbox as well.
I feel like this should be passed out by schools over the summer for, supporting students as we're hopefully coming toward the end of this pandemic period. But yeah. I wanted to ask, just for school psychologists and people out there who have ideas and are interested in making a book, like any tips, or what's the process of writing a book? How does that work exactly?
So I think like what happened for me, and then I kind of got Rebecca involved, because I think it can be really tricky. It's not so easy to get a publisher and to start with this process. But I think for me, what happened was, and this is something that everybody can do, I have a website and I would blog and I would write things. And somebody actually from New Harbinger noticed my blogs and they really liked them. And they asked me if I would write a book about grit. So that's how the first book happened. And when the first book happened, I didn't really have that much choice. So they said, would you like to write a book about grit for teens? And they didn't want to hear if I wanted to write a book of resilience for kids. That was they weren't interested. They were basically said what they were interested in. And then that's what happened. But then when I didn't necessarily want to, I felt like I had written something and there actually New Harbinger has a kid version and I was like interested more in resilience, then I was in the position that I could say to them, I would like to write a book on resilience. I'd like to do this with my friend Rebecca. Like, it allowed me to have a lot more choices and stuff. So I think if people are interested, it is a really good way if they blog. And also I know that, for example, they were really interested, in both of us because of our social media platforms and how much we can reach people. So I think that is a big part of publishing today too.
Yeah. And I want to mention that someone had reached out to me a couple of years ago, a publisher, and they said, we'd like you to write a book on feelings for elementary age students. And we have this outline for you. You just need to, plug it in. And we're going to pay you X amount of dollars. It was, and no interest or
no royalties.
No royalties. That's thank you. You can see how little I know about the whole thing. But and they were like, also, and we need it in like 2 months. And this was, I think, in March of a school year. So it just didn't sound very doable. And the amount of money they were going to pay me wasn't that much. And but then the worst part was they also said, then we need you as part of the agreement to post on all your social media about the book. I think they said 3 times a day for X amount of years. And I just said, no way. And it was such a deal breaker for me. So that may happen to some of you out there, but it just did not seem like a good offer. And I think, I would self-publish before I did something like that, because, you put your heart and soul into the words, and you don't want to end up just like making money for a publishing company.
Yeah, because it is a lot of work. It has to be something like you feel passionate about, that you feel that there's a reason to do. Like, nobody should write a book for the money. No. But it's something to put into the universe and something to put in the world. I think that has a lot of value.
Sure.
It's kind of like, nobody goes into education or school psychology for the money. That's for sure. But yeah, I remember you going through that, Rebecca, and then, all these kind of demands and whatnot. And so, that's why we love you, that you're not going to be like swayed. You're your moral compass, and you're like, no, you do the things that you do because you want to help people, not because, a publishing company wants you to do their advertising for them.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember talking about that. And then, of course, jokingly going, okay, when you say no, just give them my email. But yeah, I absolutely agree. I think, right, you need to write for the right reasons. And once in a while we get emails from journal publishers as well with the same thing, get your work published and do a research study. And then, in the fine print, it's like, this will cost, $750 or, wait a second, I thought.
That's right.
So yeah, read the fine print.
Absolutely. I've been also invited to conferences like that too, where they misspell my name. They don't know anything about me. I don't even know where and they're like, just come present at our conference. It's the Wild West out there.
Yeah. Yeah. I learned by asking a few questions to some researchers about predatory publishing in journals. I had no idea. So yeah, but this is wonderful. I am wondering, there are, one of the things I think that I am always impressed by CBT in particular is that it's very user friendly, and there are techniques and, simple solutions and things to work through, acronyms and puzzles and things that just make sense, right? And that connect. So I really appreciate that you've brought this to a kid's level, some of those same techniques and activities. So you gave us a little bit about how you progress with the, I love the sailboat or the boat picture. Tell us more about the format of the book and some of the activities and things.
Sure. Should I put up the storms poster one more time?
You know what, Rebecca, why don't you share with them the idea about how we do learn it and the do it? And,
sure.
Yeah.
So in each section of the book, we start with the learn it section, which is the lesson and the reading directed at the child reader. And then after that, we have a do it section, which is with the activity. And it's usually, we tried to make it fun and interesting for our young readers. And so the do it is a puzzle or an activity. In some sections, we have strengthen it, which is like a review and a practice of another activity. And then we even have bonus in some section. Usually we have the strengthen it section and or the bonus to be done with their special adults, or a little assignment for them to ask their special adults or have a conversation or do an activity with them. And so we really tried to tie in each lesson all of those components. The reading, which is we break down vocabulary and we break down the skill, and we format each section within the categories of emotions, or it's about flexibility. So it's about being flexible with your emotions, or creating resilient thinking or resilient actions. And we follow the sections of the storms approach. So it starts with adults. That section is online for adults. Then we're teaching the concept to children of resilience, what it is, and why it's important to learn about. And then we go through the emotions and the actions and the thinking and the actions that create resilience. And then at the end, we come full circle with community resilience, or the social support all around them in their school, in their community, in their families. And so we follow that storms approach. We had so much fun coming up with the acronyms and also working with the illustrators to create the design for those posters. So we're really proud of those as well.
Right. So like, for example, if you wanted to get more granular, so like, for example, like in the emotion section, like own your own emotions, that one, we would talk about, let's say, for example, either negative or positive emotions. We would explain what they are, how, and we kind of try to speak in a child-friendly voice. Like, you might be surprised that we might think that negative or uncomfortable emotions are okay. However, they do have a place, and they actually even can teach you something. Like angry can make you, you could be angry because something's really important to you, or sad because if a pet passed away, you're sad because you love that pet. So we try to explain to them like what that is, and then we have them like interface with that activity. So for example, they can circle and look at pictures of all different kind of faces and discover which one is uncomfortable, which one is comfortable, and then even get more granular with emotions. Like, okay, so which one is excited, which one is angry, which one is frustrated, and sort of interface with that. And then we do have, for a lot of the sections, a part where they can then do something with their parents. So for example, in the book, we have like a tic-tac-toe with different emotion faces, and then they can play emotion tic-tac-toe. So, you go X's, and before you go, you have to say a time that you felt a certain emotion, whether it's positive or negative. And so that kids can, again, it's also a vehicle for kids to start talking about their emotions. Because like, if you heard, like Rebecca, I was touched with what you said. It's like one of the things I think that happens is people have these experiences, and it's very hard sometimes to talk about it. And we know as psychologists, sometimes we're always trying to figure out what are ways we can get kids to talk about this. And sometimes, especially with younger kids, if we do a game, all of a sudden they're telling me about things that, that happen in their life because it says on the tic-tac-toe, in order to get the X, they have to say a time when they felt sad or angry or loved, So, so those are the kinds of ways that we set up the book so that it was fun and it was engaging, and it also had this idea of connection all throughout the book with your special adult.
After this weekend, when my own child dropped a toy down the toilet and flushed it, and then we had like a meltdown for, I don't know, 2 hours of just lamenting about the toy. Like little things like that. I'm like, okay, she needs to read the book. That's awesome.
If she does, I hope she can share a review. I'd love to know her opinion.
Right. And I think that's like also a good example. I think that sometimes, again, in schools, I think even as a parent, it's very easy to go very quickly into problem solving mode, like, do you want me to call the plumber? Do you want me to buy the thing? And a lot of times I think it's so critical just to be able to sit with that child. And even when we think it's like, okay, it's a toy, you have 10 of those toys, I don't know why this is like such a big deal. You're able to sort of validate that child's emotion and then be able to kind of problem solve. But I think that we sometimes as adults want to go very quickly into problem solving and not sit in that emotion place, because I think it makes us uncomfortable. We want to be helpful. Like I don't think it comes from a bad place. And sometimes it's hard for us to remember what it feels like to be that little, like, and to lose something that's so important.
Mm-hmm.
That's such a good point. I think as school psychologists, we're always, myself in particular, I just want to fix it for the kid, or I want to help the kid, or but sometimes sitting with them is the best or the best way to start. So
right. Eric, I remember you and I were talking about your article for Communique so long ago about about self-regulation and the calm down space, or taking the time to just really feel your feelings. And I think one thing that I've noticed as we're at this point in the pandemic is that kids and adults, we're so wanting to feel other feelings than the ones we have, that often an instinct is not super helpful to either shove it down, kind of bottle it up, or keep it inside, or kind of that toxic positivity of I'm fine, everything is going to be fine, we're all fine, we're getting back to normal. It just, again, like Caren said, not from a bad place, but it's really just important that we can normalize any feeling that you have is okay. And it's not dangerous to feel really sad or really angry or frustrated. It's okay.
Right. And I guess my also hope about like why writing this book today, why now, is that, every day in the paper, in the New York Times, there was a recent article about like teenagers getting stuck in ERs, and the number of, the tremendous increase that they're seeing at the college level and the adolescent level. And I would also see even at the elementary level of mental health issues. And I feel like if we give kids these skills, just like we give them the skills of reading, they will be better equipped to handle things as they get older. I think that, I'm hearing all the time now about college students that are really struggling, or high school. And I think in some ways, as somebody who wrote a book for teens, they're tricky, those teenagers, to get them to do what you want them to do, you have to be stealthy and backward, you have to do a lot. But I find that with the little kids, they're really open. They want to hear this. You go into the classroom, and it's easier in some ways to teach these skills to younger kids. And my hope is if they can learn this, that maybe they'd be better equipped for some of the things that we're seeing right now, which are pretty scary and upsetting.
Yeah.
I think that's so important, and and seeing the news and some of the pushback politically about social emotional learning, like that's some evil thing to indoctrinate and and all that stuff. I think we can all agree, like, what ridiculousness that all is, because we all see how important this is. And I like what you said about kind of teaching this now when they're little, when they're more receptive, when they're able, and normalizing these things, so that, yeah, by the time they get to those teenage years, they have those skills already. They're more prepared and, more accepting of maybe getting help or understanding that this is normal. So I like all that.
I wonder what might be some of your favorite, both of you, your favorite takeaways or activities from the book.
There, we had to cut out so many. Another thing about writing a book is
You need a part 2.
Yeah, they tell you exactly how many pages, and then when you try to conform to those pages, they tell you have to cut X amount of words. But some of my favorite activities are actually the bonus section online, and I think that's really kind of fun for older kids, especially, to go online with their parents and find those bonus sections. They can print them out or read them online. But I'm not sure if I have it's hard to choose. We really did pour so much love into each activity. And I know Caren practiced with her student, doing some activities, trying them out on her kids and finding out if they liked them and enjoyed them. And I did the same. And so I have, fond memories of a lot of them.
Yeah.
Caren, how about you?
I do. I mean, I do like. I think one of the things, and I think it is it's online. I think that we do some of the self-compassion work a little bit with kids, but we also do it with adults. I think the self-compassion break based on Kristen Neff's work is something that I think is so huge with resilience. It's something that helped me, like I said at the beginning, when I wasn't feeling well, and it was really a struggle, is just to recognize that this is a moment, that I'm having a moment of suffering, and that to be human is to suffer. I think, again, today with social media, I think it's such, kids think that everybody's life is rainbows and unicorns, and to really generalize and say, no, you know what? Nobody walks around with a big sign saying I'm suffering. However, everybody has something, I remember in one day, I have a private practice. I saw somebody who was very upset about her teeth. Then the next person came in and they were really upset about that they were anxious. And I was like, everyone has something, and you would walk around and you would see these kids and you wouldn't know that they were, but everybody has something. And then the last part is to be compassionate with yourself, to put your hand on your heart. And instead of being judgy and having judgment, to say, you know what, I'm going to be kind to myself. I'm going to treat myself like a good friend. So I really like that. And I also like, one of the things that I think that's also throughout is that we also leaned into a lot of Ethan Kross's work on self-distancing. So that when we, and I think this is just super neat, it's like when we talk about ourselves and our own problems, our amygdala lights up, the emotional center of our brain. However, when we talk about the same problems with a friend, the hippocampus lights up. It's just like, it's actually like processed in a different part of the brain. So that when we ask kids to say, well, what would you say if a good friend was going through this? Or write a letter to a good friend as if this was happening. You actually take some of that emotional juice out of it, and so that kids can be more rational and sort of reasonable and have better problem solving skills. So there are a lot of different writing and self-distancing activities that we used to try to help kids to have that distance, to be able to process things with in a way that will make them more effective.
Awesome. I'm going to ask for any last comments or questions if anybody has anything before we kind of start to wrap up. But I'm just really excited. I want to say, like, Rebecca, too, working with you, doing the podcast for so long. Anytime you, Eric, anytime you are both doing something, like Eric, you publishing your articles, and like I'm like proud of, like, I'm just amazed and in awe of all of it. And so thank you for letting me, like, interact with you and see all this awesome stuff. I'm like just blown away always. So very cool.
Thank you. That's so sweet. Well, I'm really excited to be a guest on this podcast. And it's kind of funny that the publisher is connecting us with some podcasts and stuff so we can get get out there and talk about resilience. And the publisher was like, have you ever heard of this podcast? They have, this many downloads. And I was like, I'm pretty sure School Psych Podcast has more downloads. So not to brag, but this is our favorite podcast. And we're really proud to be on it.
And the other, and also I just want to say that I think I could speak to Rebecca. Like, if school psychologists, I've always been like this, and I know Rebecca's like this. If people have questions, if they open up the book and they're like, how do I use this, or what can you do, they can totally email us. So, we're happy to help them to figure out how maybe they could use it in their schools. We have gotten a little bit of interest of different places, different countries who might be interested in using this book. So I think that it'll be great, because I think ultimately I heard once Marty Seligman ask a question, and a lot of people have also asked this question, but it comes from Marty Seligman, which is that when you ask parents or educators what you really want for your kid, you want your kid to be healthy, you want them to be happy, you want them to be a mensch, you want them to be a good citizen, and that's really what you ultimately want for your child. And then you often ask, well, what does school teach? They teach reading, there's writing, there's math. There's a little bit of a disconnect. So I know that things can be really politicized, but I also think at the end of the day, everybody no matter what your politics, we want our kids to be, good members of society, good citizens, and have those approach to work, approach to school behaviors that are going to serve them well. So, and I think doing this kind of work, building resilience and social emotional learning is just, it's really important. And I think as school psychologists, I feel very blessed in my school. I know some school psychologists, and I know Rebecca tells me this a lot, that, they're dealing only with mandated kids, but I really feel blessed that in my school, I'm allowed to do a lot of work with, students who are not mandated and to go into classes. Because I always thought this was a little weird. Like, why are we just dealing with this small subset of students? I mean, they're all these students and they can all benefit in a way. And why should we just, have such a narrow role?
That's right.
And that tier 1 is so important, because then we'll have maybe less mandated students if we could do this kind of universal type of stuff that you're talking about.
Yeah. And I feel like when people have that opportunity, I think that they get excited about it. Like, I don't have to do this work. However, it's so exciting to me. Like, I will figure out a way to do it because it's just so much fun. And I see the benefit of it.
For sure.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. And anytime, I think as a school psychologist, I'm mostly in an elementary school for the majority of my time. Anytime I can get into a classroom and do some sort of group connection and lesson, and I love it. And it's exciting, Caren. I share that sentiment too. It's fun to work with the kids. And I see our friend John, Resilience in the Kiddo starts with us. That's right.
It's really true.
Yeah,
it's really true. And I don't know if we have time, but one of the things, and I think Rebecca's doing something similar in her school. I actually have partnered with an instructional specialist. And again, if people want, they don't need to reinvent the wheel. We do this thing called staff supporting staff. And every month we get together with our staff, and it's for staff. And we do different activities from, we actually, most recently we did a gardening activity. We met outside and everyone made like little herb plant. And we did like a gardening meditation, and then we did our plans. And we've done things where we've, just met. We do a meditation. We share how we're feeling. We have like a hot chocolate bar. And at the end of the year, we're going to the kids are getting ice cream at the end, and we're going to have like a whole ice cream bar at the end. Depending on where we feel the staff is, like sometimes I feel like people sometimes don't even want another meeting, and we feel that. So instead, then we'll do something like, just have this hot chocolate bar and they can just come in, or or the ice cream, to things where we actually gather and we talk and we try to, be supportive. And, again, I feel like there's this, like, sometimes it can be this toxic, optimism. And there's also sometimes like just, let's just be resilient so that we can ask the teachers and school people to do more. And I think that we're very careful about that. And to not to go in that path. And we're very honest about that. And in the same time, I think it's really nice for people to have an avenue to talk about how they're feeling.
Yeah.
Well said. Awesome. So yeah, thank you so much. I know we're short on time. I want to remind everybody, I think our next scheduled podcast is 6:19 with Dr. Malone. We're having Dr. Malone back, so really excited for that. Maybe we've been talking about, we have kind of an empty slot because this is a month from now on 6:19, but I don't know if we can manage another episode in there, but we'll let everybody know on social media if that's the case. But anything else to close us out with, Eric? Any thoughts or last minute questions for our guests?
I think this was wonderful, and I'm really appreciative. And just how practical, this is I think a must have for school psychologists and therapists working in the schools. And you can find it online from New Harbinger and Amazon, anywhere else that we should look. Really the usual book
Anywhere
places.
you get books. Yes.
Yeah.
And please do reach out on social media if you have questions, or whether you want to work with your students on these topics, even without the book. Just feel free to reach out to us, message us. We're so happy to share, as Caren said, and happy to connect with people who care about kids.
And Caren, you have a website as well. What's your website?
So my website is my name. It's drbaruchfeldman.com. And then I have like a book page there, and they can see all the different places where the book can be published, not published, but bought. Like we have even like small distributors if people, want to do it that way as well. And also a lot of other information. So they can go to my website.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both so much. It was a pleasure to have you both here. And we're excited, wishing you the best with this book and more publications to come.
Thanks so much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.